Have you ever woken up in the morning saying to yourself, today is gonna be a good day? You got plenty of sleep the night before because your kids didn't wake you up in the middle of the night complaining of bad dreams. You're also rested because you showed some discipline and stopped binging on Netflix 3 episodes in the night before. You just got paid. You have an empty laundry basket, an empty dishwasher, and all is right with the world. Until you leave for work. You get a flat tire. You arrive late, and then an email comes through letting you know that the project you spearheaded failed. And by lunch, what had started as the best day is turning out to be one of the worst. That great mood fueled by a good night's sleep and caffeine is turning into a terrible one. And by the time the day is over and you walk through the door at home, you are done. Anything and everything is capable of putting you over the edge. Have you ever had a day like that? Isn't it amazing how many feelings we can experience in a typical day? Happiness, sadness, contentment, anger, frustration, annoyance. You may even feel multiple feelings in the same hour. It's amazing how one word, one action, or one reaction can so easily move us from feeling one thing to another in no time at all. Think about today. How did it start? When you woke up this morning, were you in a good mood? How long would that mood last if you hopped in the shower only to discover that someone else had used up all the hot water? Or that your roommate drank the last of the coffee? Or your kids left that random Lego piece in the hall and you stepped on it? How would your day change if the person who sat in the cube next to you at work seemed kind of chilly to you when you walked in this morning? Or your spouse didn't respond to your text as quickly as you thought they should? Or how would it affect your day if your kids got out of bed the first time you asked instead of the 10th? Or how would it affect your day if as soon as you walked in the door at work, your boss was there to tell you what a great job you did on your last project? You know, the reality is that so much of our perspective of life is dependent on the smallest circumstances going one way or another. Life can either be really great or things can be really challenging. Or for some of us, life is kind of somewhere in between. Some things are great and others are just not. So let me ask you a question. If life feels like it's in a really hard place for you right now, what could happen that would instantly change the way you see your life? Or what about the opposite? If you feel like things are really in a good place for you right now, what one thing would change everything for you? A lot of us tend to default into thinking that the right set of circumstances can either make us happy or keep us happy. Why is that? Because isn't it true that instead of consistently feeling at peace, we tend to operate more like yo-yos? Our emotions are constantly moving up and down like a yo-yo on a string, determining our quality of life. Up when things are good and down when things take a turn. Our lives are spent in reaction to things that happen to us. The relationship we want, the kids we want, the job we want, the phone call we want, the health news we want. We move up and down depending on our circumstances instead of proactively choosing a different alternative for ourselves no matter our circumstances. Because isn't it true that when we become attached to people or circumstances, even if they bring us up for a bit, we won't stay that way? Isn't it true that the good feeling won't last forever? That all those things that get us feeling up have an expiration date. A yo-yo can't stay up forever. While things initially looked good, the health scare returns. When it all appeared to be going so well, the relationship ends. While the doctors seemed hopeful, the pregnancy test is negative. When you seemed like a shoo-in, the job is given to someone else. When you just celebrated paying off the last one, the car needs another repair, and just like that, the string gives way and the bottom drops out. The attachments that felt secure just aren't anymore. But what might happen if instead of clinging to other people or circumstances, we attached ourselves to something more stable? And sure, we'd still feel the highs and lows in our lives, but what if it's possible to have a bad morning and not let it derail our day? Or to get a hard phone call and not let it throw everything for a loop? Or to have something that we wanted desperately to happen to not happen and still be okay in spite of it? There's a word the Bible uses for things we hold tightly to. hoping they'll provide us with some sense of lasting contentment and happiness. And they're called idols. They're things that have a lot of power over the way we see and approach life. But they're things that ultimately fall short of doing that in any lasting, meaningful way. In the book of Isaiah, a book written by one of God's prophets, God warns the people of the kingdom of Judah, saying this: "Who but a fool would make his own God, an idol that cannot help him one bit?" An idol, in other words, is something we put our confidence in, but it ultimately doesn't deliver what we think it will. It has no power. It can't help us for long. The passage continues. Then he, the woodcarver, uses part of the wood to make a fire. With it he warms himself and bakes his bread. Then, yes, it's true, he takes the rest of it and makes himself a god to worship. He makes an idol and bows down in front of it. He burns part of the tree to roast his meat and to keep himself warm. He says, that fire feels good." Then he takes what's left and makes his god, a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping and praying to it. "Rescue me," he says. "You are my God." Such stupidity and ignorance. Their eyes are closed and they cannot see. Their minds are shut and they cannot think. The person who made the idol never stops to reflect. "Why, it's just a block of wood. I burned half of it for heat and used it to bake my bread and roast my meat. How can the rest of it be a god? Should I bow down to worship a piece of wood?" The poor, deluded fool feeds on ashes. He trusts something that can't help him at all, yet he cannot bring himself to ask, "Is this idol that I'm holding in my hand a lie?" Now, we may read that and think that, of course, the people of Judah did things like worship gods made of stone or wood because they were an ancient people. Isn't that what everyone did back then? And when we read this description, we think we're in no danger of doing the same sort of thing. We aren't going to chip away at a piece of wood or stone and bow down and pray to it. And while that may be true, all that really means is that idols these days look different. They may not be made out of stone or wood, but make no mistake, we're still making idols. We do the same thing when we build up a relationship or a job or a house and then worship it. When we let it define our emotional world, we've made our own little wooden god out of something that was never meant to have that power in our lives. Now, sure, they look like people and relationships and job opportunities and health and kids and everything else we find ourselves thinking will stop the yo-yo effect once and for all. But at the end of the day, it's still an idol. And because of that, attaching our emotional well-being to it will only result in disappointment. I think that's a lesson we can gather from the prophet Isaiah. If we make something the keeper of happiness, the keeper of our contentment, then God is no longer God in our lives. That thing is. It's an idol we've given way too much control to. All of us have things that we put our hope, our faith, our trust, and our joy into. Things we find ourselves becoming attached to. Things we trust to make us happy. Things we hinge everything we think or feel on. And you know what? In reality, all of those things hold about as much power as a block of wood. Replay your week so far, or maybe just think back on your day today. What moments set you off? What brought you your highest highs and your lowest lows? What caused you to lose your temper or your cool? What made you panic just thinking about the possibility of it happening? What determined your course for better or for worse? Was it a positive phone call? A negative comment? A person who cut you off on the way to work? What steered your course by the power it held over you? You may not be able to see it, but that thing, whatever it is that has control over you and your mood and your outlook on yourself and your life, has a string attached to it. And that attachment to your heart shows you something about you. It shows your happiness is less grounded and rooted than you think. It shows that you put a lot of control in the hands of circumstances that are out of your control. It shows you're attached to things that weren't made to bear the weight of your expectations. And it shows you may have more idols in your life than you think. Have you ever noticed that as real and as raw as those emotions feel in those moments, as we're swinging from up to down or vice versa, often we look back at those times and ask, what was I thinking? How did I let that circumstance, that conversation, that disappointment, that hope control so much of me? My attitude, my behavior, my treatment of others, my view of my life and the world around me. Asking this question doesn't necessarily make what happened a small thing, but in the big picture, it wasn't as dramatic or traumatic as it appeared in the moment. It's in these moments of clarity that we're able to see the string that attaches our heart and soul to something that isn't God. And hopefully we'll use that clarity to learn to do something about it, to cut the string that attaches us to the wrong thing, so we can reattach to the right thing, to God. We live in a world where everyone ties and attaches themselves to their circumstances, relationships, and other things that they largely have no control over. As life goes, so goes our happiness. We all do it. But I think if we were honest, we'd admit it isn't working for us. We're worshiping a piece of stone. We're attaching ourselves to a block of wood, something that wasn't meant to hold that much ownership over us. Our lives are attached to the wrong things. So as you head out this week, I want you to ask yourself some questions. What are you attached to? What are you trusting in to make a bad day good or a good day better? Ask yourself, is this thing, this idol that I'm attached to, is it a lie? Am I expecting it to do more for me than it was made to do? Am I giving too much control to things I can't control? The truth is, what we are attached to determines our contentment. Imagine what your life could be like if it weren't attached to those things or people in such a crucial way. Imagine if you still cared about people, but what they said or didn't say didn't have the power to rock your world. Imagine if you worked hard to get the promotion or create a healthy relationship or work on the future you wanted, but if it didn't happen, you knew that wasn't the end of the story. Imagine living a life less attached to things that can't and won't deliver what we want them to, and more attached to the one who really does matter.